Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of the expansion of the Reformation. And we're now starting to get a little violent, aren't we? Right? So the big thing about it, though, is we left off in class talking about the rise of the radical reformers, right? The people that followed Zwingli's ideas. We started talking about the Anabaptists, who would eventually evolve into the Hutterites and the Mennonites and the Amish and the Baptists and the Quakers and all those people, right? And the big thing about them was the idea that they believed in adult baptism, right? That you had to be of age to choose your baptism and things like that. The church I was raised in was very much like that. It's a big ceremony. There's a big pool of water and stuff. Literally down the road from where I grew up in a river, there was this place called the Baptizing Hole, and we used to swim in it when I was a kid. So I feel like I might have been baptized on accident, in that water. So the big thing about though, looking at it, you have to understand in the long run that what's going on is things are starting to get really climactic, really chaotic, really violent, right? You're starting to see leaders condemn Protestants to death. You're starting to see leaders like publicly execute Protestants just because they don't like them, right? This is a very big moment and a big transition in what's going on, okay? Now, what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to clip in a flip that I talked about last year where I came in and I talked about the Keppel Wars, the Peace of Augsburg, the Schmalkaldic League, right? The Schmalkaldic League is going to be very important. All those German princes that are supporting Luther and hiding him would eventually form themselves into a group known as the Schmalkaldic League, right? And the Schmalkaldic League would even be so brass as to go against Charles V and directly start a war against him, right? But we're going to get into all that right now, so I'm going to clip that in real quick, and then I got like 15 minutes on the back end of this where we're going to talk about some fun guy you've all probably heard of before, a little guy named Henry VIII, all right? So I'll see y'all in a sec. Actual violence that was being enacted onto them because of their radical reformative ideas, right? So going into it as well, you're then going to see large-scale warfare popping up, all right? So the religious wars in Switzerland and Germany are very good examples of this different violence that's popping up during the Reformation period, right? So first and foremost, you got to understand that when we're looking at this entire thing, German princes are clinging to the ideas of Luther, right? Luther is writing in secret. He's marrying this woman that he said oh, she was a nun and I saved her from Catholicism, right? You got Luther, who's also starting to get kind of off his rocker, a little bit, and he's actually starting to kind of really freak out and go in some weird different directions and saying really mean things about Jewish people. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is those princes are still clinging to these ideas. Now, really quickly, though, why, right? Why are they clinging to those ideas? That's exactly right, Stella Merrill. It's the exact same thing that you brought up in class, right? His appeal is growing because the German princes feel like they will gain more power from being Protestant because they won't have to listen to the Catholic leader, Charles V, right? They'll be able to claim some kind of religious dissension. Now, the big thing about it, though, going into it as well, is you got to also understand that Charles V is a fervent defender of Catholicism, right? He is trying to oust out Luther, arrest him, and then also arrest any of his followers that he can find. Now, going into it, though, the very first large-scale wars that actually break out are actually going to happen in Switzerland, which some of you are like, wait a minute, Switzerland? I thought Switzerland was neutral about everything. This actually is the beginning of that neutrality process, right? Switzerland is going to have its first, it's going to have some wars during the Reformation and then have a handful of small wars actually going into the 1540s and 1600s. And then following all these different movements and following the Reformation period, Switzerland's going to be we're not fighting in wars anymore, right? They literally are going to go with a stance of neutrality forever after that. But the very first wars of violence are going to break out in Switzerland between Protestant and Catholic sects of Swiss government, right? So they were known as the Keppel Wars, right? Or the Keppel Wars is a Swiss civil war that broke out in the Holy Roman Empire because at this time, Switzerland was a part of the Holy Roman Empire between Catholic and Protestant factions. Now, these wars that break out are going to be handfuls of small skirmishes defending cities. Now, in this process, though, you're going to see some of these reformative figures actually participate in them. And in the Keppel Wars, Zwingli died, right? And when Zwingli dies, you're going to see the growth of other Protestant movements in different directions, right? So this is a big thing to understand, is that these wars that are breaking out in Switzerland are just indicative of later wars that are going to be on the horizons as well, right? Charles V, because of this, is going to call another diet, right? So the big thing about it is, let's remember really quickly what a diet is, right? So the thing about a diet, or what a diet is in general, is a diet is just a meeting, okay? Just like we talked about earlier when we talked about the ideas of the Diet of Worms, right? The Capel Wars are going to inspire Charles V to have another diet to avoid large-scale war in the Holy Roman Empire, because he's freaking out. Because the first Capel War happened in 1529. The next diet he calls is called the Diet of Augsburg, which is in 1530, right? So he calls this diet because he wants to try and actually avoid the breakout of large-scale war all over the Holy Roman Empire. He sees the German peasants' revolt happening in 1525. He sees the Capel Wars in Switzerland happening in 1529. He sees the persecution of Anabaptists that's popping up during this time period as well, and he wants to try and prevent large-scale warfare because large-scale warfare is very, very expensive. Large-scale warfare is well known to kill lots of people and damage the reputation and the strength of an entire area, right? So Charles V, as you can tell, comes into power when he's 19 years old. He's got a very, very chaotic thing going on. So we'll talk about this more when we actually get into absolutism and stuff like that. But the thing about it is when you really look at how much Charles V controlled during this time period, not only, think about this, not only is he dealing with the Reformation, but he's also dealing with the colonies. 1519 is when Cortez strikes out and goes after the Aztecs. A little bit after that, Pizarro is the one that's actually going out and taking over the Inca. Then the encomienda system happens. All that stuff, those are Spanish holdings. Who is Charles V's grandma and grandpa but Isabella and Ferdinand? He controls all Spanish land, right? By this point in history, Charles V, write this down, controls 25% of the globe. 25% of the world, the known world at the time, which is bananas. All right, so now, in general, though, he calls a diet because he has to avoid large-scale war in Europe so he can focus on the colonies and keep trying to do his best job. Interesting little factor, a lot of historians think that Charles V was a very good leader, but was just in a situation he could never control, right? And so at the Diet of Augsburg, the Lutherans decide to show up to the Diet with a letter or with a document known as the Augsburg Confession, right? So Diet of Augsburg, Augsburg Confession. See how this whole thing works? Now, the big thing about it, though, as well, is a lot of diets have been held in Augsburg for a really long time due to the fact that it's the ancestral home of the Fugger family. Exactly. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is getting into it, this family has actual very good banking ties to Charles V. They hold the diet in Augsburg. The Lutherans show up with the Augsburg Confession. What this is a document outlining the entirety of the Lutheran faith, right? Outlines the entirety of the Lutheran faith, outlines all the concepts of the Lutheran faith and how it's different distinctly from Catholicism. And it's basically a document that is even still used in the Lutheran Church. And it's issued in 1530 to outline the entire understanding of the faith. Well, Charles V, when he came to the Diet, he had a lot of things to talk about. He wanted to talk about fighting the Ottoman Empire and keeping them out of the Holy Roman Empire. He wanted to talk about trade and trade goods. And then the last thing on the docket was religion. And at this Diet, a big thing happens, okay? He refuses to acknowledge Lutheranism as an official religion of the Holy Roman Empire. He says, I am a fervent Catholic. I am a defender of Catholicism. We are not acknowledging this faith. That means everyone leaves this whole meeting, and in 1531 is when the actual Schmalkaldic League is going to be founded, right? So check this out. When we're looking at the Schmalkaldic League, Schmalkaldic League, there we go. So I don't know what happened to the picture that I had in there, but it's all of a sudden gone. So the big thing about it, though, in general, is the Schmalkaldic League was founded in 1531, and after this Augsburg Confession meeting, they actually signed the massive document of all these German princes, signified by all these medallions, that they would actually defend their faith and refuse to give it up, and that no matter what Charles V said, that they were going to keep worshiping their ideas, right? Charles V did not realize this because he was dealing with so many other things, but later on, he's going to declare war on them, right? And in 1546, Charles V declares war on the Schmalkaldic League and decides to go out and fight in a large-scale war, even though he was trying the entire time not to do it. Well, the thing about it is, oh, there it is. I actually had it in there the whole time. Weird. Huh, how about that? So the big thing about it, though, getting into it, though, is the Schmalkaldic War is going to end basically in a stalemate, right? The Schmalkaldic War ends without anybody actually really winning one side or the other, and what's going to happen is then Charles V is basically going to just have enough, right? Charles V is devastated. He can't figure out what to do. He doesn't know what else to do, so he decides to call a massive meeting. And at the Peace of Augsburg, one of the biggest meetings that ever happened in European history, he decided to cease military alliances in all wars, and he issued this thing called the Peace of Augsburg. He's like, no more of this war. No more of this stuff. And at this meeting, Lutheranism became a legitimate church, right? And this is also right after this whole thing, the Schmalkaldic War in 1546, interestingly enough, coincides with someone's death. Martin Luther died, right? Martin Luther died 3 months before the Schmalkaldic War ever broke out, right? And Charles V, a lot of historians say that Charles V might have actually used that precedence as a time to actually invade and wage war. But the biggest thing about it in general is that the Schmalkaldic War will wage. Luther is now dead. Lutheranism isn't going anywhere. And so at the Peace of Augsburg, Charles V decides to recognize Lutheranism as a legitimate church, right? And so getting into it as well, or wait, where are we going? There we go. Oh, wait, no. Oh, are we really going to do this right now? Hold on one second. There we go. Sorry about that. Sometimes the Prezi will geek out a little bit. But the biggest thing about oh my God, again? There we go. All right. 2 times, I guess, it's going to take, okay? Now, getting into it, though, all of this fighting is going to eventually lead to the 30 Years' War. But at this meeting, at the Peace of Augsburg, Charles V is going to decide to recognize Lutheranism as a legitimate church. He's also going to do another interesting thing as well. He's going to start splitting his empire, right? Now, the big thing about it in general, though, is that you need to understand that the Peace of Augsburg is going to kind of lead to a little bit of an indicative idea that war is going to be a regular thing in Europe now over religion, right? Now, at the Peace of Augsburg, though, you're going to see Lutheranism recognized as a legitimate church, and the year before it and the year right after it, Charles V is going to start going basically mentally insane. Now remember, his mom was named Joanna the Mad, so of course she probably was a little bit, like bipolar possibly and stuff like that. Now, the very important thing to understand is that in 1554, right before the Peace of Augsburg, which is in 1555, Charles V began a process of splitting the Habsburg family into 2 distinct branches, an Austrian branch and a Spanish branch. So with that, that's going to start spiraling out of control, and then basically what Charles is going to decide to do is Charles is going to abdicate the throne in 1556. Now this is going to be a major key thing that's going to come up. He's going to go a little bit crazy. He's going to retire to a French monastery because it's quiet and he can sit there and enjoy his time, and he also becomes a raging alcoholic, and he starts showing signs of mental instability. He actually literally apparently, while he abdicated the throne following the Peace of Augsburg and split his family in half and had the Spanish branch on this side and the Austrian branch on this side, all of this is going to lead to a very unstable Europe, just like it led to a very unstable Charles. Charles, apparently, while living in this French monastery, would drink all the time, read constantly, and then became obsessed with his own death. He lined the walls of his rooms in this French monastery with clocks that all ticked at the exact same rate, and he would just become obsessed with the idea that he is one day going to die. And as he became so obsessed with his death at one point, he also wondered, would anybody even really care if he died? And so he literally staged his own funeral. And in this process, while he had abdicated the throne, he gave the throne of the Holy Roman Empire to his brother, and then he gave the throne of Spain to his son. And when this whole thing happens, he fakes his death. His son, his brother, come to this fake funeral and all this other stuff. And he was so frustrated with the fact that nobody was upset enough at his funeral that he sat up out of the coffin and then stormed off to his room, where he would then later die a few years later. The whole thing about it in general, though, is Charles V obviously is off his rocker, but we'll come back to that stuff here in a little bit. But now what we're going to do is we're going to be jumping backwards into England. We're going to go over to England, and we're going to start talking about the English Reformation under this guy, Henry VIII. But we're going to talk about this dude in class, because you got to talk about Henry VIII in class. But I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. Yep, there we are, and we're back, right? We're back here now. We're going to be starting to resume our lesson, and we're going to start talking about good old Henry VIII, right? So Henry VIII, let's get into him a little bit. Henry VIII, King of England, also known as the Defender of the Faith in 1521, has a very, very large backstory that is not present on this screen, right? But I'm going to talk about it a little bit just so you know who the heck he is, know a little bit more about him, and also just get to know him a little bit as a person, right? Because I think a lot of the times when we talk about AP history, when we talk about history in general, a lot of people tend to lose the story, right, of the human beings we're talking about. And a lot of times kids will unintentionally turn people or human beings into flashcards, right? They'll turn them into flashcards and be like, okay, Henry VIII started the Church of England, when he get divorced, had 6 wives. Yes, that's true. All those things are very, very true. And they very, very much did happen in history. But the thing that we need to understand is that Henry was a person, right? Henry was a person, and he is the second king in the new line of these people known as the Tudors, right? So the Tudors, his family, is a Lancasterian branch, all right? So what I mean by that is the Lancasters were the ones who went against the Yorks, right? And they had a massive war against each other, known as the War of the Roses, right? We talked about that a little bit, and I think it was like Emma Rogers in class when we were reviewing. Like at the very, very beginning of the year, it was like, oh, it's because they had 2 roses and 2 seals. The Yorks had a white rose, the Lancasters had a red rose, and so literally the war between them was called the War of the Roses, right? Well, Henry's dad is the guy that finally wins the whole thing, right? And Henry's dad is named Henry VII, right? Henry VII beat this guy named Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, which Mr. Wooderson loves talking about, the Battle of Bosworth Field. Like me and that guy, when we just hang out, stuff like that, playing golf, Battle of Bosworth Field, right? Big thing about it, though, is like Henry VII defeats this guy known as Richard III, right? And Richard III was the Yorkist that was trying to claim the throne for himself. Interesting little fact, though, if you actually look into the whole thing, they found Richard III's body. It had been lost for decades. Lost for decades and decades. No one knew where the heck Richard III's body was after the Battle of Bosworth Field. And we ended up finding it one day on accident when they were uncovering a parking lot in England, and they just found him. Like, it was just like, this is a parking lot body. He was just hanging out down there, right? Big thing about it, though, getting into it, all right? And look it up online. I swear it's actually a real thing. But getting into it, though, Henry VII comes in, and he suppresses a huge amount of Yorkist revolts, right? A huge, huge number of people start trying to actually lead riots and raids on England, and he just purges all of them out, creating a sustainable and a stable environment for the England that would actually follow after him. He also set up his son to actually get married to someone who was actually from southern Spain, a woman by the name of Catherine of Aragon, right? Now, Catherine of Aragon is a very, very important figure. She is related to the Castiles, Isabella and Ferdinand. She is also the aunt of Charles V. Big deal, right? So, but the interesting thing about it is, she didn't marry Henry VIII, all right? So like very, very early on, at the very first iteration of this marriage, Catherine did not marry Henry VIII. She actually married his brother, King Arthur. So actually, unfortunately, there would never be a King Arthur in English history. Prince Arthur is who she married and stuff like that. But he ended up dying, okay? So he ends up dying, and so Henry VII, after the failed marriage of Arthur, because Arthur and Catherine did get married officially for a little while. After that marriage dissolved and fell apart, what ends up going down, though, is literally Henry VII says, okay, fine, we're going to get Henry VIII married to Catherine of Aragon so we can keep this alliance between these 2 places, okay? So what ends up going down, though, Henry VIII is not happy about this. He's not super excited. And by this point in his life, Henry VIII is the young, strapping prince that all the women of England are just absolutely in love with, right? Apparently, Henry was very, very tall. He was about like 6'2", 6'3"-ish, right? Very athletic, super, super into manly events like jousting and wrestling and stuff like that. So he was very, very fit, and he was very, very athletic, and everybody was just like, oh my God, Henry is coming. So what ends up going down, though, getting into it a little bit more, is his father will die, right? Henry VII will die, and leadership in the throne will actually pass to Henry VIII, right? To him and his new wife, Catherine of Aragon, who they keep trying to have kids. And they have 5 of them, but 4 of them die, right? So 4 of them die by miscarriage or stillbirth, and then only 1 lives. And the one that would live was named Mary, right? So now, Mary, okay? Mary Tudor is going to be very, very important as we go forward, okay? Now, the big thing about it, though, as well, is Henry VIII was also swept up almost immediately in a lot of his, super toxic masculine ways, right? He wanted to start a bunch of wars. He went to war with the Holy Roman Empire at one point, also went to war with France at one point, and then he actually tried to have a peace settlement with France, and when he was actually at a peace settlement with France, he literally, went and then wrestled Francis I, the king of France, and lost, which is really, really embarrassing, and it's actually considered, something that kind of bruised his masculinity going forward. But going into it, though, during all this craziness, though, this is all leading up to Martin Luther. None of this stuff has even actually went down yet. This all happened in the late 1400s, right? To give you perspective, all the stuff we were just talking about with Henry VII, his dad, Catherine of Aragon, originally marrying Prince Arthur, who dies and stuff. All that stuff happened before Michelangelo even painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, right? So the Tudors, though, underneath the power of Henry VIII, are going to show up, and Henry VIII, when he comes to power, gets swept up in the Reformation because Martin Luther begins all of his ideas, right? He begins writing the 95 Theses, he begins printing them and having the pamphlet war with the Pope, and he starts doing all that stuff. And what ends up going down, though, is Henry VIII Oh my God, that was gross. Fervently defends Catholicism, right? So the thing that you need to understand is Martin Luther was a very prolific writer, okay? Like, and as a very prolific writer, in the 1520, he worked on a certain book where it basically criticized the seven sacraments, right? He said Martin Luther was like going against the seven sacraments, calling them like a checklist into heaven and things like that. And what ends up going down is like Henry VIII writes his own book in retaliation to try and curry favor with the Pope, right? He tries to curry favor with the Pope, but he writes this book known as Defending the Seven Sacraments, right? And the book, The Defending the Seven Sacraments, earned him a very special title known as the Defender of the Faith, which is still to this day a title that you can earn, right? Like, so it's still to this day a title that you can earn, right? And going into it though as well, what ends up going down and happening is that everything progresses forward. He immediately after he writes this, he earns the Defender of the Faith title. He starts trying to move forward in his career and stuff. He ends up hitting about the 1530s, right? And in the 1530s, he notices one key thing is going down. His wife will not produce a male heir, right? Catherine of Aragon will not produce a male heir, and he cannot figure out what's going on, so he desires to do one key thing. He wants to have his marriage not divorced, but dissolved, right? Now, a big thing that you know about Henry going forward before we talk about anything else is you know that he ended up having a total of 6 wives, right? So just so you understand, there's a rhyme. However, it's a little bit there's a rhyme to remember all of them, right? And what happened to each of them. And it goes divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, right? So say that with me again. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Divorced, beheaded, died. Yeah, and then you just get after it all you want to, right? So the big thing about, though, getting into it, you have to understand, is that he originally wants it annulled. Like, when he goes to the Pope originally, he goes up to the Pope and he's like, big fella, I need this thing annulled, right? I need this dissolved because obviously God does not sanction this marriage because he won't give me any male heirs. And also there's a papal law, an old school law, that says I'm not supposed to marry my brother's widow anyway. So how about you just do me a favor, Pope, and you make this annulled, make it go away. You know what I mean? Like, just dissolve this marriage. And what ends up going down, though, is the Pope says no. He adamantly says no. And the reason why he says no is because he's being puppeted from behind by Charles V, right? The same guy that had that crazy funeral we just talked about, right? So the crazy, fake funeral and ended up retiring and getting really drunk all the time and, having, cirrhosis and killed him and all that stuff. Lined his walls with clocks. So that dude told the Pope, no, tell him no. That is my aunt. That is a descendant of our line of kings and queens from Spain. You will not do this to her, and you will not let her publicly be shamed. And so what ends up going down, though, is the Pope tells him no. And Henry says, okay, fine. You want to play that way? Whatever. And he breaks himself away from the Catholic Church altogether. And then in a process starting in 1530, he begins to pass a series of different acts where he would literally show up and become the head of the Church of England, right? Now, the big one that ends up coming down is immediately after he creates this separation from him and as well as the Catholic Church, he annuls his marriage to Catherine, and he marries this woman that he already got pregnant. So the interesting thing about it is before his marriage to Catherine was even, divorced or annulled or whatever at first, what ends up going down is there was this woman that he was, obsessed with, right? He was head over heels with this woman that was a lady of the court and stuff like that, and her name was Anne Boleyn, right? And Anne Boleyn was apparently super, super pretty and very, very attractive and stuff, and had these witchy eyes and things, and everybody was really, really into her. And so was Henry, right? And Henry at this point in his life was still in decent shape and stuff like that. And he spit some game, right? He was pretty charming and stuff. And Anne was into him as well. And so they ended up trying to get the whole divorce wrapped up as fast as possible, but Henry got a little overzealous and got pregnant, before, the marriage ever even ended. And they got married in secret and stuff like that. It was absolutely wild. But what ends up happening is he has that whole thing to Catherine, annulled, and Anne becomes the new Queen of England. Now, the act of supremacy and the act of treason are the two acts that are considered the formal creation of the Church of England, right? So in 1530, when he begins his actions separating himself from the Catholic Church and creating the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church, whenever he's doing that, whenever he's moving in that direction, you have to understand, it's not formal yet, right? So the act of supremacy is the big one, right? And in the act of supremacy, it said that the Church of England will have one supreme head. Not a pope, not anyone in Italy, not the papacy, but the supreme head of the church will be none other than the King of England himself, right? So literally, the leader of England is the supreme head of the Church of England, right? And so the Church of England was formally created with the Act of Supremacy. Now, another big thing that happened, though, as well, is the Act of Treason. He passes that also, being like, hey, all right, like, if you try to buck back against me, if you try to ignore my acts, if you try to go against the, like what you call it, the Anglican Church that I have now created, if you try to go against it, you will be tried for treason and probably executed. And that happened to, of course, one of his good friends, and one of our good friends, Sir Thomas More. Y'all remember Sir Thomas More? The guy that wrote the Utopia? Yeah, he was really against this whole marrying the lady you got pregnant Anne Boleyn thing, right? He was super against it. Remember, Sir Thomas More wrote the Utopia, and he thought that Christian lives and society had derivated so far away from the original Catholic intention that it was going to, like, basically lead itself asunder and into destruction. And so Sir Thomas More was like, do not get divorced from Catherine. We'll figure this out. It's not a big deal. And he adamantly protested it as his Lord High Chancellor. Now, Lord High Chancellor is like the highest, like, position you can have in the English government that's not king, right? And Sir Thomas More was elected Lord High Chancellor, right? So Sir Thomas More literally, though, told Henry don't do it, and he went off and did it anyway, and so Henry considered that a violation of the Act of Treason, and Sir Thomas More was beheaded. All right, so yeah, literally, Sir Thomas More, the guy that we talked about earlier in the Renaissance, is going to be killed by Henry VIII, right? And, though, then gets pregnant. Hooray! Well, no, she was already pregnant. Hooray! She's already pregnant, and she produces, not a boy, but a girl, right? So it produces a girl, and they name her Elizabeth, right? So we now have two surviving kids, right? We've got Mary and Elizabeth. So the thing about it is, though, is now Henry wants to get a divorce from Anne because he doesn't like the idea that she can't produce a male heir also, and it's just more of the same problem. So he has her trumped up on charges when she refuses. He, like, goes up to her and he's like, we're going to get a divorce so I can get married to somebody else. And there's already this woman that I have my eye on. Her name's Jane Seymour, right? I'm going to get married to her, and we're not going to be together anymore. And so what ends up happening, though, is Anne goes, no, I don't want to get a divorce. No, I refuse. And then what ends up going down, though, is he's like, oh, you want to play this game? Let's active treason you as well. Has her charged with treason. He has her charged with witchcraft and incest as well, right? Literally says that she was, like, cheating on him with her brother, okay? Which is not actually true and is not founded in any kind of factual evidence whatsoever. But Anne Boleyn gets beheaded, right? And when Anne Boleyn gets beheaded, apparently her head rolled around on the scaffold and was, like, literally due to the nerve tensions and the brain chemicals up there. It was going like, and it was, like trying to talk and stuff like that, which is super, super gross. Now, I also have heard some weird story as well about how, like, apparently Anne Boleyn had, like, a sixth finger and, like, a little one on her pinky or something like that. And that's a big reason why, like, they said, oh, she's a witch. Look at that little pinky digit that she's got over there. And then so there's that. And then I've also heard one as well where they, like, Henry VIII had her heart cremated and, like, kept it by his bedside. A lot of little facts that I'll look up after this flip to see how valid they actually are. Now, his third wife, though, Jane Seymour, does what none of these women could do. And Jane produces a male, right? So Jane produces a male heir, and all of this craziness and all of this wild stuff going on. We're now getting into the 1540s, and literally his name is Edward, right? But the problem is that Jane dies during childbirth due to complications, right? And now he goes on to have 3 other wives, right? Henry went on to have 3 more wives after Jane Seymour died during complications, but a big deal about it is now he's not worried about having a male heir as much as he's worried about finding a partner, right? And so the thing that ends up going down is he has 3 more wives, one of them Anne of Cleves. That's his third divorce. Remember, it's divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Say Jane Seymour is the one that died during childbirth. Anne of Cleves is the one he also gets divorced from. He apparently was only married to her for like a week, not even, like some people say a few hours, right? So, but Anne of Cleves literally was this woman from, whatchamacallit, she was from the Holy Roman Empire. She was a German princess and stuff like that. It was like the very first version of Tinder, where his very, very new, like, Lord High Chancellor Thomas Cromwell rolls up with a picture of her, right? An oil painting of her, painted by a guy named Hans Holbein, which is a very, very good artist. But he shows up and literally goes like, hey, check out this German princess. What do you think? Swipe left, swipe right. And literally what happens is he's like, oh, I'll go meet her. And then he's like got a very, very big embarrassing story that happens when he actually meets her. He wants it to be like a fairy tale and it doesn't work out the way it intended to. But I'll tell you that when we actually get to class. He actually has Sir Thomas Cromwell executed for this whole thing being like, she wasn't as hot as you said she was in that picture. And then also Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, cheats on him with one of his, like, courtiers and stuff like that, and she ends up actually being executed. And then also, last but not least, Catherine Parr just doesn't die. And literally what happens is Henry VIII actually ends up dying in 1547. So going into it, though, you also need to understand is during this entire process, the Anglican Church is going to retain most of its Catholic stuff, and it's going to be pretty much diet Catholic for a really, really long time. But go ahead and jot this stuff down. I promise you 27 minutes or under, so we'll stay right there. Y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all soon.